Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and very soon Stellar Blade, which is finally releasing this Friday. A PlayStation 5 exclusive that was originally planned for, say, PS4 during its dev, also seems to have been planned for Xbox and PC, at least based on the first listings, which have now changed. Maybe with that, there's actually hope long term for it to come to other platforms in the future, but in the lead up to this launch, you might have seen posts about it, bits of gameplay, maybe all the discourse around the main character's design and so on. But if you're like me and have been waiting for the launch to really think about the game, I wanted to make a video that kind of throws the most important info, the things to know going in, basically bring you up to speed with that useful information, that kind of thing. So let's just jump into it. First up, you may have seen some gameplay clips, and that's because there's been a playable demo. I always appreciate demos for games that are basically free teasers for the game, because you get to try the gameplay, see if the combat functions and feels as good as maybe it looks, and then get a good idea if you'd actually enjoy it. Any team that puts out a demo like this is one that I'm going to appreciate. You should always take advantage of it when you can. On that note, here's something pretty cool about that demo. It includes the first stages and first boss fight of the full game. Your progress in the demo can then be brought over to the full release, which means if you do take the time to beat the demo, you're basically playing the full game. You are progressing your full game. You can progress straight past that point if you want when you play the full version. So props to the dev team for that one. But with that said, what actually is Stellar Blade? What are we getting into? We're talking about a game that's been in development for over 5 years, and you might have originally heard about it under the name Project Eve. This is a fast-paced action-adventure game from that third-person perspective. There's a lot of weird comparisons going around about what this game is, whether it's a mashup of this game and that game. I'm never a massive fan of those kind of comparisons, but there are fair ones to make. I will say that it reminds me of Nier and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, but it's obviously its own thing. The game was developed by the Korean team who made the very successful Nikke, a gacha game of, well, completely different function and design. So it's quite a change of pace for these devs. Their first dedicated console game, completely new combat style and so on. It's going to be interesting to see how the full game ends up. Speaking of which, the setup for the story is quite familiar to begin with. If you played Nier Automata, you might remember the basic setup there. You, a relatively emotionless character, are sent down to Earth, which has been lost. It's been taken over by robots, and you're there to fight and reclaim it for humanity. At least that's the original plan. Now in Stellar Blade, we have a totally different setup. We play a relatively emotionless character. At least that's how she's been portrayed at first. She's sent down to Earth to reclaim it from the alien monsters. Very on the nose, but the way Nier's story goes is of course incredible, and Stellar Blade deserves the chance to tell its own story. I hope it does. The monsters though, they're called Naytibas. They're winning an all-out war against humans that forced them from the planet. Humanity now survives in space in these big spaceships called colonies, and Eve and her team return to Earth to fight off the creatures in the hopes of ultimately retaking the planet. Unfortunately, the Naytiba did win the war for a reason, and so this initial attempt goes really bad, leaving Eve and a few survivors alone to continue the mission. You'll eventually find the last surviving city on Earth though, where there's these important characters you're going to have to work with. At first you need to establish some trust. The questions like, where did the monsters come from? Why did they win and how did it happen this way? That's what the story is going to be about, but it is a familiar setup. The actual flow of questing seems interesting enough. The game is surprisingly open, semi-open world in design, apparently inspired by the new God of War series. We've got those larger open areas to explore, still somewhat linear and where it thinks you should go, not true open world. The city we mentioned will serve as a massive central hub. It's full of characters who are definitely going to distrust you at first. It's not until you get them to open up and see you're really there to help that you're going to start to get more from them. You will find supply camps which will work as checkpoints, functioning as a safe place to recover, upgrade and progress, very soulsy bonfire style. We will naturally have standard progression to work with though, upgrading your weapons, increasing the amount of heals, maybe their potency, improve the gear to add more stat enhancers. Relatively standard progression in my eyes. On the topic of game length, it's said that the story will take roughly 25 hours of play if you specifically just do the story and basically nothing else. However, to hunt down every upgrade, complete the side quests, really do the game until you're satisfied, it should be easily double that, at least according to the devs. I imagine if you're really into the combat though, you'll come back time and time again just to engage with that. For the next thing to know though, is the concept of combat itself. Basically, I want to warn you that this is the pretty popular parry and evade style of combat. We've seen that quite a lot recently, all about timing and execution to punish enemy opens with deliberate attacks and combos rather than say blind hack and slash at some sort of blind fast pace. This can be surprising if you've watched clips or even trailers, because they make the combat look so flashy and fast when it's actually a bit slower in play. There's a lot of comparisons to Souls or Souls-like games because of that, but I wouldn't say that's completely accurate either. And that's part of why I don't really like game mashup comparisons. It is clearly its own game with its own pace, but that's my heads up and warning about it. It's a bit slower than it might first look. You can't expect to go in blindly attacking and juggle enemies easily. There's heavy emphasis on skill-based counters and punishes. Again, definitely recommend the demo though to see if this flow works for you. Personally, I love the time counter style games, and this hits the mark for me on that. Having said that, you actually can't take many hits before you'll fall, which keeps the pressure high while also making, say, successful counters, evades, punishes very satisfying. To actually touch on the various main combat mechanics, you will fight using a sword and some kind of futuristic gun at once. They've shown upgraded versions of that gun thing, but it looks more like a utility option rather than a main source of damage, though we don't know everything about it. On that note though, you have your standard options like light and heavy attacks, which can be stringed together in different combos based on your unlocks. You've got your starting evade, which, as I'll mention, can be changed in pretty big ways, and of course your parry to stop hits entirely. What's important there is how parries will sap the stamina bar of enemies, which after a few successful parries, you can use something called retribution, essentially a special critical hit animation. I imagine this was inspired by Sekiro's posture system, if you're familiar with that. Outside of that, we do have some more unique options. There's the simple ability to rush in. It's a dash forward to a target, avoiding range combat instantly. You've got special attacks, known as beta attacks, which you can see at the bottom right of gameplay. You just hold L1 and then press whatever associated bound key you have, triangle, circle, square, or X, and you unlock more of these as you go. Lastly, there's also the shield mechanic, which will greatly reduce the damage you take while it's active, but that can be easily broken by taking damage too quickly too many times in a row. So the idea seems to be avoid damage for a period to make sure the shield recharges when you make a mistake. But those are just some of the things we've learned from, say, the demo. It's obvious we'll have access to more in the full game as we progress the skill trees. So moving on to a next thing, Stellar Blade does have a skill tree, but it actually has multiple. They're not overly complicated, there's not a ton of options, but because you have multiple, it's interesting. Attack, beta, and survival, but there does seem to be more available in the full game, we will see. Attack is the basic combos, upgrading those to unlock new strings, and also some new types of attacks, while beta has the special attacks that we're unlocking and equipping. Survival's more about defense and evasion, and that's how you're going to improve your evade, literally making the windows for perfect evades bigger, which is pretty important, while also being able to enhance what happens when you do perfect evade, like teleporting behind an enemy, unlocking new punishes based on those, or knocking enemies away to allow for powered up ranged attacks. So a few interesting options there at very least. Here's one thing that was surprising to see. There's actual platforming in the game. Rather than just moving from point A to B, maybe sprinting and jumping between locations that are relatively flat, there are all kinds of things like climbing, edging around cliffs, swinging from pole to pole, even swimming to break up the action and maybe add some more movement-based puzzles at different points. It's neat to see when I was imagining more of a flatter game in its exploration. Again, near comparisons, but if they do this well, it should make it so the environments are a bit more interesting to move through, so hopefully it is good and not just in the way. Finally, for our last thing, just be aware that there are difficulty options. They do exist, just like you might find in Nier. However, compared to that, there's only two here. There's normal, which is, I guess, the way the game was designed to be played, and then there's story, which should greatly weaken the enemies. I would imagine that's the way to play if you're just looking for an easy experience, rather than leaning heavily into the combat. Maybe you just want to experience the story. Still, either way, it is nice to see that these options exist for the people who want them. But there you have it. Those are the main things I think you should know in the days before launch. I do think the game feels and plays quite uniquely, even though yes, it's clearly inspired by various other titles. But at the end of the day, if the game feels good to play, I think it's going to do well. It's gained a lot of eyes based on the controversy around Eve's design, much like, say, Nier and 2B originally. Hopefully this can be another case of people being drawn in by that and finding actually a really good game. Personally, just give me satisfying combat and I'm always going to be interested. If there's anything else you guys would like to add to this topic though, you can drop it in the comments. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.